Well, as you know, Dave Morimoto is chairman of the Natural Science and Mathematics Department at Lesley University, and a very well-known birder. But more than that, Dave has a very wide breadth and interest. And I've had the honor of knowing him for several years because he's been the structure and the support behind my, as an architect, being able to teach a class on urban sustainability in a biology department. And that is his vision and his support that has made that possible. And I'm very honored to invite Dave Morimoto.
Thanks, Christopher. Thank you. I think I'll use this one. Can we get an amen for elementary education, earth, air, fire, and water? Because it really is that simple, quite frankly. So I'm really happy that we had a reverend preaching before this, because this is going to be kind of a preaching thing too, a little bit, even though it's ostensibly about bird intelligence. But just on the river theme, though, there was a study in Science that looked at river meandering as a self-organizing process, and they looked at the average sinuosity of a river, and guess what it turned out to be? 3.14. So I threw a bunch of pictures up here. I kind of threw the Angry Birds one in just as a joke, but just as a counterpoint to human intelligence in light of bird intelligence, and just to remind us who's really on top. That's a joke. Anyway, we're going to be sending this out. I broke every convention when it comes to slides. Unlike Betsy, who did a great job of really having readable slides. Mine are not readable. But we're really intelligent, so I'm going to really ask you to use those calories. It's a very ecological process, thinking and reading, because you're using energy from the food you ate. And so I really implore you to use your intelligence to try to read as much as possible, if you can, as an excuse for being able to not know how to make a presentation. But you know what? I studied ovenbirds and several other species for years, and this is what actually gave me the knowledge about birds being intelligent. Science does that, but really what it was is what people have been talking about here. It's natural history. It's being immersed in nature. You don't have to go to school to know that birds are intelligent. You don't have to study biology or complex systems. You just have to immerse yourself, and this kind of indigenous wisdom will come your way. We just heard that that's true. And their song is Teacher, 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 by the way, so it's a very convenient species to learn from. Looking up what intelligence means, there's nothing really there that says it can't be birds, or slime molds for that matter. It made me feel good in putting together this presentation, because I didn't really feel very intelligent, just cutting and pasting, using the snipping tool and putting on a slide. But I was able to choose and pick out and discern, so I actually felt a little closer to bird intelligence when putting this slide together. This presentation, but the ability to solve problems flexibly using cognitive skills as opposed to merely instinct is sort of a working definition of intelligence. And this is a quote from this book here that really can't really mix the apples of human intelligence with the oranges of bird intelligence, although I will try to, because I'm going to be talking about the intelligence of fruit at the end of this. So just to do what I'm supposed to be doing, tell you a little bit about bird intelligence. Sort of the conventional view, we have about 10,000 species of birds, and they all have a relatively large brain to body size ratio, and if brain is a measure of intelligence, then suggests that they might be intelligent. And we all kind of know that crows and parrots are probably the most intelligent species. You can really do this just going on YouTube. You don't really need me to do this. And there are many interesting examples. I'm going to try to give you a few. And birds are more like feathered apes than bird brains, although bird brain to me now is a compliment. Thank you, Adam. In fact, in 2005, a group of scientists declared that the naming of the structures of the bird brain are actually derogatory because they assumed that they were ancient, paleo, striatum, or whatever. So this is actually a compliment to these people, that really super intelligent people still tried to, they did hold up science inadvertently by naming things according to cultural conventions and not actually what was really there. So our views of the bird brain are really changed now because the names of the things have actually changed. It's really kind of important, right? Once we name things differently, we see them differently. And so here's one of the busy slides, counting. I'm only going to pick out maybe Alex the parrot here, who is capable of counting up to 6, actually summing small quantities. Had a zero concept, like bees recently have been found to have a zero-like concept. And they can actually recognize numbers as abstract representations or symbols of real collective things. That's, when you talk about anthropology and ethnography of humans, I mean, that's actually one of the defining features, right? Symbolism. And these parrots can do that. I have a couple other stories about Alex the parrot told to me by Irene Pepperberg and friends that I'll share later. But several species have been shown to actually have some number sense, which makes sense. I mean, Clark's nutcrackers can remember up to 5,000 or so different cache placements of seeds. Blue tits up here are well known for their ability to associate a certain color of milk cap with whole milk, which has more calories, and so they preferentially went to those milk caps and pried them open to drink milk. You probably heard about the woodpecker finch on the Galapagos Islands, which uses a tool as a twig as a tool to probe insects and insect larvae from crevices. You've probably seen this picture here of a green heron. Other heron species and crows actually use fish, bread, and things like that to attract fish. So they're actually fishing. And here's a carrion crow in Japan. You've probably seen this too, where they actually put nuts in the crosswalks and then wait for cars to run over them so that they can eat them. This is all, they probably laugh at us that think that this is actually the epitome of their intelligence, because they're actually much more intelligent than this. All you have to do is watch them again. I know this isn't Western jay, but blue jays have actually been shown to provision for future need, along with scrub jays, so they can plant seeds or bury seeds that they know that they're going to want for breakfast in a place that doesn't have those seeds, and where they're going to be for breakfast, and they actually, provision for future need, which doesn't really sound intelligent, but it actually is, and you can see why it would be important for their survival. Western scrub jays actually have funerals, some kind of strange gathering around dead birds of their species that have attracted scientists' attentions. Even the little brown nuthatch has been shown to use twigs as tools to probe for food and things between crevices in the bark. And goffins, cockatoos have been studied. There's a whole lab of them here. They involve in tool use, and object permanence is a big study of birds, whether or not they can tell if an object is permanent, even though it's still there, even though they can't see it. And, rivaling studies of human toddlers. So there's lots and lots of examples in the literature of this. Even more, my favorite is the fish crows in Finland, who go to abandoned, when the ice fishermen are out ice fishing and they leave for a while, some of these hooded crows will come in and actually pull in the fishing line. Bob Stymist, who's a great bird watcher and who actually works here in the Museum of Comparative Zoology, he actually watched a crow for 45 minutes trying to insert a prosthetic limb into his leg that he was missing. I studied ovenbirds and northern mockingbirds, and they definitely know their neighbors, consistent with this whole idea of theory of mind, which has been shown in bee eaters and jays and ravens. But they definitely know their neighbors, which social intelligence. I mean, people talk about how the human brain is big because of social intelligence. I don't know if you heard about Dunbar's number, but the brain size related to social group size kind of thing. So birds definitely have social intelligence. Even one bird species, the European magpie, has passed the mirror test, can recognize itself in a mirror, which is not an easy test to actually conduct. And object permanence in everything from chickens. Chickens, I had a whole slide on chickens that I took out because I had way too much information. But chickens show object permanence as well as referential signaling and things like that. And some people even think that nest building And displays are actually signs of intelligence, and really they are, in a way, nature's intelligence. This is a popular article. There were at least 20 sightings of things like whistling kites and brown falcons taking burning material and spreading fires. Why would they do that? Because the insects and mammals that escape those fires are how they, I mean, I've been to Guyana, the Rupununi savannas of Guyana, and you see fires all the time, and the Aplomato falcons come from from across the landscape whenever they see a fire to chase the insects and things leaving. So there's actually 20 independent sightings of these creatures spreading fires, presumably to flush out the insects and mammals and reptiles that they feed on. And now then, there's a whole bunch of tests in the laboratory, especially with things like New Caledonian crows. And so the basics is this lucite box test with a food reward in it. And these New Caledonian crows can use strings to pull up the food. They use a ball to dislodge the food. They can use a stick to dislodge the food. They can unhook a window to get the food. The Aesop's fable thing is where they can actually add things to a column of water to raise the height of the water to access the food. They even do that in a tube that's a U shape. They know to go to one end and put something in. And they've done it, they don't do it with sand. They only do it with water because water works. And they won't use lightweight things like styrofoam. They only use heavy things that they know will raise the water level. So they actually do know basic laws of physics, which is one of the signs of intelligence, I think. And memory, too. They can even associate cards, like certain cards, with food rewards. And there are plenty of other tests. They can, not surprisingly, abandon food after a while because they know that it's probably spoiled. Facial recognition, you probably heard of Marsliff's studies of crows where they put these masks on and harass these crows. And even years later, there's still memory passed down through the generations. These crows remember these faces. I know people who had to paint one side of their car a different color when they studied crow colonies because they knew they were coming otherwise. And when you get the mailing of this, you can click on the links. You can see Snowball the cockatoo prove that birds have rhythm. And hidden causal agents, too. So this is actually a really interesting, this is an 8-step process for New Caledonian crow. First, they have to retrieve a small stick from a string. Then they have to use that stick to get rocks out of these little cages. They have to do that 3 times. Then they have to take those 3 rocks and put them over here to get a larger stick, and then use that larger stick to get food. So it's an 8-step process. They were taught these things separately, but they were able to put it together when presented with this task. Pretty intelligent. And this is a hidden causal agents where New Caledonian crow watched someone probing through here, interrupting where it usually gets food. And in some of the studies, this person would walk past this other person standing there, and so the crow would know that the person was gone. In other studies, the person would stay there hidden and wouldn't make themselves known, so the bird was probably thinking, is there still someone there? And so here's a picture of the crow immediately going down and retrieving the food when he sees the person going. And here's the 9th inspection before it even tries to, because it still thinks there's someone hidden there. So it's these kinds of more sophisticated tests trying to get at the nuances of intelligence in birds. And I have to talk about keas. Keas are these amazing New Zealand parrots that have contagious laugh calls. They've done studies where they play them back and they actually causes contagious laughter. They're very mischievous creatures. There's a video here where they're actually using moving traffic cones in the highway, and you can see them here. They're notorious for pecking at rubber gaskets and things, and so they're plotting to go after a tire. And here's this little photo here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a bird standing on a seesaw lever, which is uncovering a food source for another bird. And right here is a study where they have to cooperate together. Each have to pull 1/2 in order to get the food reward. So, pretty intelligent, if you ask me. And pulling up a string, just like the hooded crows do with the fishing lines. And some recent ones, you might have heard about the the reciprocal relationship between humans and honey eaters in honey guides, in Africa, where and this is a study that actually shows that they've developed this mutual relationship where the calorie benefit is greater as a result of the birds signaling to humans where the honey is, and the humans accessing the honey, and then the birds can then access it as a result of that. So they kind of cooperate across species. And even the ducklings have abstract thought. They get imprinted on two objects that are the same, and it's going over here to these saying, oh, those aren't the same color but different shapes. They're going over here and say, oh, these are the same shapes but different colors, and they finally say, oh, here we go. And humans do that too, by the way, which is one of the reasons we have this big polarization going on between points of view. We stay with like individuals, so do ducklings. So it seems that the more ingenious we get at trying to determine animal intelligence and bird intelligence, the more intelligent they actually seem to be. And Alex the Parrot, here's one story. There was a woman who was doing a film on Alex the Parrot and went into Irene Pepperberg's lab, and Irene tried to get Alex out of the cage to entertain this person, and Alex would have nothing of it. And so Irene said, pizza, 1 hour. And Alex waited for a little while and said, pizza, shoulder, 1 hour. And so he negotiated for having shoulder time and pizza in return for spending an hour with this person. And she didn't publish this because she's such a scientist that she didn't want to push the boundary, unlike me, who I don't care anymore. Because natural history taught me that there's a gap that can't necessarily be explained by just science or natural history, that we have to bring them together into a new view. She also told me about when they were covering the cages one night, the birds were actually talking to each other in English, pretending that they were doing some of these tasks and saying, nope, you got it wrong. But she taught these birds English so that she could know how they thought, not to see how good they were at learning English. And some of her techniques are actually used in children now, special needs, education. This was relatively recent, where starlings, bird that we see everywhere, use aromatics in their nest. It's like aromatherapy, and they actually found that it causes them to sit on their nests longer. It's kind of interesting. Is that intelligence? I don't know. I have a diffuser at home. I put spearmint oil and things in it. But I think that's pretty interesting what natural history can teach you about a bird that's so common. And here's a very busy slide. Now I'm going into a little bit more of the brain. I did have a slide that showed 600 observations of birds invading new areas, and they found that the birds with a larger brain to body size area ratio were much more successful in establishing themselves in a new area, and that was correlated with their level of innovation. So innovation and cognitive skills seem to be closely aligned, and this is one study that takes it a little bit further and shows that the sizes of the different association areas are actually correlated with innovation in both birds and primates, and that this is a very remarkably similar features of cognition in at least 6 phyletically independent avian lineages, along with primates. This is a study, I think it's 2004, that also looks at, we never thought that birds were that intelligent because they didn't have like a neocortex like we do. It's all about the neocortex. And so these studies recently have shown that intelligence doesn't require these, which actually is kind of cool. It means it frees us to think about intelligence in new ways, right? So the same kind of information processing in birds and mammals, but different brain structures involved. There was another study in 2003 that did the end brain of corvids, crows, and the authors even said that a neocortex is not required for intelligence. And this is just showing the primate. These are just funny pictures that I put in here. They have nothing to do with the article. But it's showing that parrots have a primate-like pathway that links the forebrain, the midbrain, and the cerebellum. That they're not the exact same structures, but they're very analogous, and they do the same kinds of processing. So we're getting to know bird brains a lot more than we have in the past. And relatively recently, this is 2016, we found that birds have primate numbers of neurons. In fact, they have more. And so this last quote is pretty cool. Avian brains thus have the potential to provide much higher cognitive power per unit mass. Someone should remake Alfred Hitchcock's movie of the birds. And this is actually looking at RNA transcripts, not only in birds and mammals, but also in alligators. It shows that there's actually a homologous. In one of those previous slides, by the way, I did throw in that the fox gene is the same gene involved in human motor speech and in bird speech as well. So it shows that we're all, like we needed to know that. I mean, evolution teaches that, right? And you put that in a bacterial perspective, and you really see birds and mammals almost as indistinguishable from that perspective. But what's in a brain, anyway? Do you know about Mike the chicken? He was a chicken that was killed for dinner, but lived, because this is him, there's his head. He survived for 18 months. They converted an eyedropper into a neck dropper, and they fed him, and he walked around perfectly well for 18 months. And this article talks about the blue-collar brain. The brain, this is good systems thinking, by the way. The brain is part of the body. Therefore, it doesn't run the body. It serves the body. And the body is white-collar. But what does the body serve? The body serves the larger group, whether it's a social group or the ecosystem. In fact, flocks of birds, murmurating starlings, mixed species flocks are interesting because there's several different species. And we're using this information, actually, coding, finding the simple rules that lead to this complex behavior in artificial intelligence and gathering data. And plants probably do the same sort of thing through the mycorrhizal. We'll be hearing about this later in the conference, that plants, by virtue of their mycorrhizal connections, actually communicate with each other. Some trees can actually identify their own offspring by virtue of these connections. So there is something called collective intelligence. I think it's a real thing. In fact, humans have studied it in humans. There's a collective intelligence factor in humans that is related to how much, whether there's a symmetry in turn taking and how sensitive people are to the social sensitivity, and the proportion of females in the group are all related to a collective intelligence factor in humans. There's no human, no ant, no bird, or even our planet doesn't stand alone. So we have to actually start thinking and embracing sort of David Chalmers, he's a neuroscientist, his crazy ideas of consciousness, that consciousness is everywhere and in everything. And that's what the evidence is showing us. In fact, here's where I start going a little crazy here, but this is a semantic web. This is the mycorrhizal network. This is the 282 neurons of Cyanodagritis elegans, a type of roundworm. These are slime mold creating a pattern that's very similar to the Tokyo grid system. So people are starting to study these network phenomena. This is the Framingham Heart Study here. That's the internet, an economic network. There's the actual hardwiring of the internet. There's a great video here on the power of networks you should all see. And this is where I'm pushing the boundaries a little bit, but some people, like folks at Santa Fe Institute, are starting to look at these networks and finding out that those Betsy Dexter Dyer's diagram of the metabolic network, if you look at the topology of that network, it actually isn't that different from the topology of our brain, which isn't really different from our social network structures when you measure them mathematically, which really isn't that different from the ecological networks. So there's this underlying structure that supplements sort of the ecology and evolutionary perspective of connectedness in space and through time, with this perspective that there's some sort of complex system substructure underlying all of this. And believe it or not, it's out there in the cosmos too. This is Barabasi. He's the father of network science. You should go to this website. It's pretty cool. Show the dark matter web of the universe and look at all the different models they use to try to model it. And so what they found in this article here is that the degree distribution or fluctuation, sort of the power signal of the cosmos and the brain, very, very similar. So even the cosmos has a network structure that reflects in a self-similar fractal pattern that very same structure that's in our metabolic pathways. So what this tells me is that life and intelligence is self-similar across nested levels as one complex adaptive system. That these sort of scale-free small world networks occur everywhere from the metabolism to the cosmos. And that this is actually what we need. This is a physical foundation for our spirituality. And some people have actually gone so far to call it causal entropy, the causal entropic factor. These are like physicists talking about this. And this is actually going back to the brain a little bit. This is a detailed study of the gold star connectomes of 5 different species, from mice to fruit flies to humans. And they did this modeling, and the motif structures within that network are these hubs, heavily linked nodes, and modules, which are these compartments. And the higher order structures, the hubs gather together to form rich clubs, and the modules gather together to form module hierarchies. Well, Rubinoff did this modeling process that suggests something similar to what Stephen Jay Gould suggested about evolution and historical constraints and their relative importance compared to selection. And Rubinoff's conclusion is that these higher order structures aren't selected for, they just form naturally. Like life is this kind of origami that's unfolding, and that it's inevitable. Some people are actually talking about the physical structure of the universe, the distribution of species on the planet, as being just as explainable by thermodynamics as it is by evolution. Something bigger happening here. And so just a shout out to the Santa Fe Institute, which is looking at intelligence as a property of the complex world and asking these larger questions about intelligence. It's even happening in the humanity, in the social sciences with Eduardo Cohen's book, How Forests Think, where an anthropology beyond humans is in large part about learning to appreciate how the human is also the product of that which lies beyond the human context. And so he talks about the ecology of the larger self. So I'm seeing a post-humanist movement here where the social sciences are also joining in. There's time for convergence here, the greater us. This is a very busy slide, but basically we've domesticated ourselves and we've lost about 20% of our brain size since agriculture, which is a natural thing. It's a natural thing. All species of birds that have been domesticated, all species of creatures have lost a lot of their brain size. The wild relative of the cat has a 33% larger brain than the domestic variety. So it might be a natural thing. We've actually learned recently in a recent study that bird language development is greater when they're domesticated. So domestication, being friendly and empathetic with each other, that might have actually helped our own language develop. So this is a perspective of complex systems from the Santa Fe Institute, and the big revolutions have been the PC, putting all that information at our fingertips, and then linking that up into the internet. And now is artificial intelligence, which is basically an externalization of intelligence. So all we have to do is push buttons. So that's why our brains are smaller. But it might be just a natural artifact of emergent behavior of complex systems. I mean, that's how we evolved from bacteria, in fact. But we have a choice. And basically the message of this talk is that listening to the voices of nature is probably the best and the perfect solution for holding on to our biodiverse identity, because we're losing species really fast. And to the extent to which we lose this immersion in our natural environment, the kind of immersion that gave me the insights into the intelligence of birds, that's what we need. That's the answer to that question that someone asked Gabe Bradshaw. You know, what do we do? Natural history. It's the oldest continuous activity of human beings, bar none. It's why we are here today. Yet with 82% of people in the United States living in cities, and it's going to be 3/4 of the world by 2050 living in cities, we're heading toward general environmental amnesia. And so I want to revive natural history as a birthright It's a social justice issue too. And I call it indigenous urban ecological knowledge. Taking this indigenous knowledge of being one with the earth and being one with an ecosystem and combining it with what we know about science. And they're all pointing in one direction. And that is we are one with all. And that natural history, to know our kin, is really a birthright. We must expand our boundaries beyond humans in the age of post-humanism and preserve more than half Earth. I don't know if you know about E.O. Wilson's goal to preserve half the wildlife left on Earth. We've lost 60% of the wildlife since 1970. And the result just came out a couple of weeks ago. And so it's really a time of desperation. I think we're going to become Homo domesticus and incapable of knowing ourselves through our interactions with others. And that's our choice. And so I'd like to end with a poem called Oneself. And so I tried to use words to represent nature in the most simple forms of combining an emergence. So the title is capital O, Oneself. It's ourselves. Ourselves. Apart. And apart. With everything of everything. From one another and other. One self. Thank you.